My name is Judith, and I'm 58 years old, and last Thanksgiving changed how I saw my own family forever. Thanksgiving used to be my favorite holiday. I loved the smell of roasting turkey filling the house, the sound of laughter spilling from the living room, and the warmth of knowing everyone I loved was under one roof. But that morning felt different from the start. The air was heavy, thick with unspoken words. And though the aroma of cinnamon and butter filled the kitchen, it couldn't cover the chill between us. I woke up early, as I always did, to start cooking. My hands moved automatically, chopping onions, seasoning the bird, mashing potatoes, but my heart wasn't in it. Ryan, my only son, used to hover beside me as a little boy, stealing bits of pie crust dough when he thought I wasn't looking. Now, he barely stepped into the kitchen except to grab another cup of coffee. His eyes were glued to his phone, his face expressionless. "Morning, Mom," he muttered without looking up. "Good morning, sweetheart," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "Can you help me with the cranberry sauce?" He sighed, like I'd asked him to lift a mountain. "I'm in the middle of something for work, maybe later." Brittany, my daughter-in-law, appeared in the doorway then. She gave me a polite smile, the kind people use when they're trying to be kind but wish they were somewhere else. "Do you need me to bring anything from the car?" she asked. "No, dear," I replied softly. "Everything's ready." She nodded and disappeared before I could say anything else. The silence that followed was deafening. I looked at the empty kitchen counter and remembered when it used to be crowded with family helping out cousins, nieces, everyone laughing as we cooked together. But things had changed. They all had their own lives now, and I had mine, or rather, what was left of it. Still, I told myself not to complain. Families drift. Children grow up. That's life. I tried to convince myself that Ryan still loved me, that he was just stressed or tired. But as the hours went by and the tension deepened, I couldn't ignore the ache in my chest. When dinner was finally ready, I called everyone to the table. The house looked beautiful, the candles flickered gently, and the tablecloth was one I'd embroidered years ago when Ryan was in college. He didn't seem to notice. He sat at the head of the table, scrolling through his phone even as I placed the turkey in front of him. "Let's all say grace," I suggested quietly. Brittany cleared her throat and reached for Ryan's hand. He hesitated before setting his phone down and bowing his head. As I spoke the familiar words of gratitude for food, family, and love, my voice trembled slightly. I hoped no one noticed. We began to eat. The sound of cutlery filled the silence. I tried to start a conversation, asking about Ryan's work, about my grandson's school, about their new house. Brittany answered politely. Ryan barely responded. "So," I said finally, forcing a smile, "I was thinking maybe I could stay the weekend. I could help you decorate for Christmas." Ryan put down his fork and looked up at me for the first time that evening. His eyes were hard, his tone colder than I'd ever heard it. "Mom, you're becoming more of a burden than a blessing these days." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. The entire room went still. Even Brittany froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. My chest tightened as if someone had reached inside and squeezed my heart. What did you say?" I asked quietly. He sighed, as though he were explaining something obvious to a child. "You're always saying how lonely you are, how you need help with things. I get it, but I've got my own family now. You could try to be a bit more independent instead of depending on us all the time." His words cut deeper than any knife could. I'd spent my entire life caring for him, raising him alone after his father died, working double shifts to put him through college. And now, sitting across from him, I felt like I was looking at a stranger. My hands began to tremble. The fork slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the plate. My grandson, confused by the tension, asked softly, "Daddy, what's a burden?" Brittany's face turned pale. "Eat your dinner, honey," she said quickly, her voice trembling. I couldn't stay at that table a second longer. I muttered something about needing the bathroom and stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. My legs felt weak as I walked down the hall. In the bathroom, I gripped the edge of the sink and stared at my reflection. My eyes were red, my face pale. I looked older than I had that morning, not just tired but worn down. I thought of all the sacrifices I'd made, all the love I'd poured into my son's life, and now, this was how he saw me? A burden? The hum of laughter drifted faintly from the dining room. But it didn't sound like my family anymore. I pressed a hand to my heart, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly alone. I stayed in that bathroom longer than I needed to, long enough for the turkey to grow cold and the conversation to move on without me. When I finally returned to the table, no one met my eyes. The rest of the evening passed in silence. After everyone left, I stood in the quiet kitchen, surrounded by the dishes and the leftovers no one wanted to take. My hands shook as I wrapped the turkey in foil. That night, as I sat alone by the dim light of the stove, I made a decision I never thought I'd have the courage to make. I decided I was done waiting to be loved in a house that no longer had room for me. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. Those words, "You're becoming a burden," echoed in my mind like a cruel joke I couldn't stop replaying. The clinking of silverware had stopped, and the air at that Thanksgiving table had turned so heavy I could barely breathe. My son, my Ryan, the little boy who used to hug me after every scraped knee, now sat across from me with a look that made me feel small, invisible even. I wanted to believe he didn't mean it, that stress had spoken instead of his heart. But the more I looked at him, the more I saw how deliberate his expression was. Cold, detached, tired of me. My throat tightened. "Ryan," I said softly, "is that really how you feel about me?" He didn't meet my eyes. "Mom, I'm just saying you could be a little more independent. You don't need to call me every other day about bills or your back pain. I've got work. I've got a family. It's a lot. A lot." That's what I was to him, too much. An inconvenience. A weight. Brittany cleared her throat awkwardly. "Ryan, maybe that's not the best way to." She needs to hear it. She's always talking about how she misses company, how she feels useless. Well, she wouldn't if she tried to do more for herself. The silence after that was unbearable. I felt my face grow hot, my eyes burning with unshed tears. My grandson poked at his mashed potatoes, clearly sensing the tension but too young to understand it. The clatter of my fork falling onto the plate seemed to echo louder than his words. "Excuse me," I whispered, pushing my chair back and walking toward the hallway. My legs were trembling, but I refused to let them see me break. Inside the bathroom, I locked the door and pressed both hands against the sink. The mirror reflected someone I barely recognized. Puffy eyes, red cheeks, lips trembling. I'd spent decades being strong, the kind of woman who carried everyone else's weight. But in that moment, I felt hollow. Empty. Burden. I whispered the word to myself. A burden. The sound of it broke something inside me. Images flashed through my mind. Ryan's childhood. The late nights I'd stayed up sewing his Halloween costumes, the dinners I'd skipped so he could eat, the college acceptance letter I'd cried over because I knew it meant he was leaving me but I was still proud. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every prayer I whispered over his future, all of it suddenly felt meaningless. I sat on the closed toilet lid and wept quietly into my hands. Not loud sobs, just silent, aching tears that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than pain. From betrayal. After a while, I washed my face, fixed my hair, and took a deep breath before stepping out. I didn't want them to see I'd been crying. When I walked back to the dining room, everyone was pretending everything was fine. Brittany was clearing plates. Ryan was helping their son with dessert, as if nothing had happened. I forced a smile. "I think I'll head home," I said softly. Ryan looked up briefly. "Already? You just got here." I swallowed hard. "I'm a little tired, that's all." He nodded, indifferent. "Okay, Mom, drive safe." That was it. No hug, no apology. Just two short words that cut deeper than his earlier insult. On the way home, the world outside blurred past the car window, orange leaves, dark skies, the first hints of winter. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles white. I couldn't stop hearing his voice. "You're a burden." By the time I pulled into my driveway, I felt drained. My small house, once filled with laughter and warmth, now felt like a museum of memories. Photos of Ryan and his family lined the mantel. In every picture, he was smiling. I stared at them, wondering when that smile had stopped being for me. I sank onto the couch, still in my coat, and stared at the quiet room. The refrigerator hummed softly in the background, the only sound in the entire house. I thought about calling him, about demanding he explain himself, but what would be the point? I already knew how he felt. Hours passed. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, watching the moonlight reflect off the frost-covered yard. Somewhere between anger and heartbreak, a calm settled over me. Maybe he didn't see my worth anymore. Maybe he never would, but I wasn't going to stay somewhere I wasn't wanted. As the first light of dawn crept across the horizon, I stood up and made a decision that would change everything. I didn't shout. I didn't leave in anger. I just knew I couldn't keep living like this, waiting for scraps of affection from someone I'd given everything to. I walked to my bedroom, pulled out an old suitcase, and started folding my clothes. My movements were slow, deliberate, almost ritualistic. Every folded sweater, every packed blouse felt like closing a chapter of my life. When I was done, I sat on the edge of the bed, the suitcase at my feet. I looked around the room one last time, the framed photos, the old armchair, the blanket I'd knitted for Ryan when he was 10. Everything reminded me of him, but maybe it was time to start remembering me again. That night, I made a decision I never thought I'd have the courage to make. I was going to disappear from his world entirely. Let him see what burden really meant when it was gone. I packed my bags before sunrise, while the house was still asleep. The sky was barely starting to lighten, and the air outside carried that crisp, sharp chill that comes right before winter settles in for good. My old clock on the nightstand ticked softly as I zipped up the worn suitcase I'd had since my honeymoon with Carl, my late husband. It was the only sound in the quiet house, a house that had once been filled with laughter and music and now echoed with nothing but silence. I moved slowly, deliberately, making sure every drawer I opened closed without a sound. I didn't own much, a few clothes, my favorite cookbook, some framed photos, and a small box of letters Carl had written me before he passed. Those I tucked carefully into the side pocket of my suitcase. Each item I packed carried a memory, a piece of the woman I used to be. I paused by a framed photo on my dresser, Ryan at 8 years old, holding up the fishing rod Carl had bought him. His smile was bright, full of wonder and innocence. My heart clenched painfully. That little boy had loved me without conditions. What had happened to him? Downstairs, the house was dim, lit only by the faint glow of the porch light streaming through the curtains. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, just looking around. The table was still set from the night before, plates stacked neatly, the turkey carved clean, a few crumbs left from the pie. I could almost still hear the echoes of laughter that weren't really there. I reached for a notepad on the counter and scribbled a short note. "Don't worry about me. Take care of your family. Love, Mom." My hand trembled as I set it beside the coffee maker, the same one Ryan had bought me last Christmas when he still called me Mama sometimes. I knew when he woke up and saw it, he'd understand I was gone. Or maybe he wouldn't even notice right away. Maybe that was the saddest part. Outside, frost glistened on the grass. I loaded my suitcase into the trunk of my old car, the one Ryan had always said I should sell because it was too old to be safe. Maybe he was right, but that car had been my freedom once, and it was about to be again. I took one last look at the house, the porch swing Carl had built, the flower beds I'd planted every spring, the window where I used to wave goodbye to Ryan when he left for school. Everything looked still, almost lifeless. As I started the engine, I whispered, "Goodbye," though there was no one to hear it. The drive was long and quiet. The highway stretched ahead of me, empty except for the occasional truck roaring by. I kept my hands steady on the wheel, my mind replaying every word from the night. Before, a burden. It still stung, like a bruise that wouldn't fade. But beneath the hurt was something else, a strange sense of clarity. For years, I'd been living in the shadow of being Mom. Everything I did revolved around Ryan, his needs, his family, his life. I'd forgotten what it felt like to make choices for myself. Now, for the first time in decades, I wasn't running toward anyone. I was running toward peace. 2 hours later, I reached a familiar sign by the side of the road. Welcome to Lake Maplewood. It was Carl's hometown, a quiet, tucked-away place we used to visit in the early years of our marriage. After he passed, I stopped going. The memories had been too heavy to face. But now, somehow, it felt right to return. The little cottage by the lake still stood, though the paint had faded and the shutters hung a little crooked. Carl and I had bought it back when dreams were bigger than money. It had been our sanctuary, a place filled with warmth, laughter, and the sound of the water gently lapping at the shore. When I unlocked the door, a wave of nostalgia hit me. The scent of dust and old wood filled the air, and sunlight spilled across the faded floral curtains. Everything was frozen in time, the same couch, the same table, even the same chipped blue mug Carl had loved. I set my suitcase down and exhaled for what felt like the first time in days. The silence wasn't heavy here, it was peaceful. Healing. I made a pot of coffee on the old stove, even though the percolator hissed and sputtered like it might give out any second. Sitting on the porch, cup in hand, I watched the lake shimmer in the morning light. The stillness wrapped around me like a soft blanket. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a burden. I didn't feel like someone's obligation. I just felt human again. As I sat there, the reality of what I'd done began to settle in. I'd walked away from my son, from everything familiar. He would wake up soon, see my note, and maybe realize what he'd said, or maybe he wouldn't care. Either way, not to punish him, but to finally take back the parts of me I'd lost trying to stay in his life. My phone buzzed on the porch table. For a moment, my heart leapt, maybe it was Ryan. But when I picked it up, I saw it was Brittany. The message was simple. Hey Judy, have you seen my casserole dish? I think I left it at your place. That was all. No mention of the argument, no question about where I was. My chest ached, but I forced a small, sad smile. Of course. That was exactly how it would be. I turned off my phone and set it aside. The breeze from the lake rustled through the trees, carrying the faint scent of pine and cold water. It felt like a whisper, quiet but sure. I looked out over the still surface of the lake, the sun climbing higher behind me. By the time Ryan realized I was gone, I was already somewhere he'd never think to look, in the one place I'd finally found myself again. The small cottage by the lake hadn't changed much since my husband's funeral. The moment I stepped inside, I was swallowed by memories, the creak of the wooden floorboards, the faint smell of cedar and old books, the faded curtains that still swayed gently when the wind blew off the water. It was as if time had paused here, waiting for me to come back. I placed my suitcase by the doorway and stood in silence, listening to the soft ticking of the old clock Carl had hung in the kitchen 30 years ago. Back then, we were newlyweds, full of dreams and laughter. We'd built this cottage together with our own hands, sanding the floors, painting the walls, arguing over wallpaper, and ending up laughing on the floor when we spilled paint everywhere. Every inch of the place carried a memory of him. It felt strange at first, being there alone. For so long, I'd avoided coming back. After Carl died, this place had become too painful, a reminder of everything I'd lost. But now, standing in the doorway, I realized it wasn't pain I felt. It was peace. A quiet kind of peace that whispered, "You're home." I made myself a pot of tea, brushing off the dust from the kettle, and sat on the back porch overlooking the lake. The morning sun shimmered on the water, and a pair of ducks glided lazily near the reeds. I closed my eyes and inhaled deeply, letting the cold air sting my lungs. It felt cleansing, almost like forgiveness. I whispered softly, "You were right, Carl. You always told me not to let anyone make me forget my worth." My voice wavered slightly, but the words felt true. The days that followed were slow and quiet, just what my soul needed. I cleaned every inch of the cottage, sweeping away years of dust and sadness. I opened windows that hadn't been touched in a decade, letting the crisp autumn air chase out the mustiness. Each small task felt like reclaiming a part of myself I'd neglected for far too long. The nights were hardest. Without the hum of city traffic or the chatter of television, the silence could be deafening. But even then, I found comfort in it. I'd sit on the porch wrapped in Carl's old blanket, staring out at the lake under the moonlight. Some nights, I'd talk to him like he was sitting right beside me. "I miss you," I'd whisper. "But I'm learning to live again." A few days later, I heard a soft knock on the door. It startled me. I hadn't told anyone I was here. When I opened it, I found Henry standing on the porch, holding a basket of apples. He was one of Carl's old fishing buddies, a kind man with laugh lines etched deep around his eyes. "Judy?" he said, smiling in surprise. "Well, I'll be. I didn't think I'd see you back here." "Hello, Henry," I said warmly. "It's been a long time. Brought these from the orchard down the road. Figured you might like them for pie." That made me laugh, a genuine, unexpected laugh. "You remembered. Carl used to brag that nobody made apple pie like you," he said, grinning. "The whole lake missed your cooking." We sat on the porch talking for a while, reminiscing about old days, fishing trips, bonfires, summer barbecues. It felt good to talk about Carl without crying. For the first time, the memories brought warmth instead of sorrow. Before he left, Henry mentioned something that caught my attention. "You know, the local community center's been running a charity program. They're short on volunteers for the holiday season, cooking meals for folks who've fallen on hard times. You'd be perfect for it." I hesitated. It had been so long since I'd been part of anything. "I don't know if I'd fit in," I admitted. He chuckled. "You'd fit in anywhere there's kindness and a kitchen, Judy." After he left, I sat on the porch thinking about what he'd said. Maybe that was what I needed, something bigger than my pain. A reason to wake up every morning beyond simply existing. The next day, I baked my first apple pie since leaving home. The smell of cinnamon filled the cottage, wrapping around me like a memory I didn't want to let go of. As the crust browned and the apples bubbled, I realized how much I'd missed creating something with my hands. That evening, I packed a small basket with pie slices and walked down to the lakeside. The water glistened under the pink and orange sky. I sat on a bench Carl had built years ago and shared a piece of pie with the ducks that waddled close, laughing softly at myself. It was silly, but it felt healing. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't thinking about Ryan or the pain he'd caused. I wasn't wondering if he'd called or noticed my absence. I was just present, alive. When I returned to the cottage, the phone on the counter blinked a new voicemail. I hesitated before pressing play. It was from an unknown number, a woman's voice cheerful and warm. "Hi, this is Nora from the Maplewood Community Center. Henry told me you might be interested in volunteering with us for the holidays. We'd love to have you." I smiled, feeling something stir in my chest, something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. I looked out at the fading sunlight over the lake and whispered, "Maybe it's time." That single conversation would set in motion a change none of us could foresee. When I walked into the charity center, I didn't expect to feel alive again. The building wasn't anything fancy, just a converted old church with whitewashed walls and the smell of baked bread drifting through the air. But the moment I stepped inside, it felt warm in a way my son's house hadn't in years. Laughter echoed from the kitchen, pots clanged, and the hum of conversation filled the halls like a song. A woman in her late 40s with curly brown hair and kind eyes approached me with a wide smile. "You must be Judy," she said, wiping her hands on an apron. "Henry told me you make a mean apple pie." I laughed softly. "I suppose he's still spreading that rumor." "I'm Nora," she said, shaking my hand. "Welcome to Maplewood Hearts. We're just getting ready for the lunch crowd. Would you like to help?" I hadn't realized how much I'd missed hearing those words. Would you like to help? Not because someone expected it, but because someone wanted me there. The next few hours flew by. I tied on an apron and helped peel potatoes, slice vegetables, and stir big pots of soup. The kitchen buzzed with life, teenagers on community service hours, elderly volunteers chatting as they worked, and a group of single mothers who helped serve meals to families in need. "Can you make gravy that doesn't clump?" one of the younger volunteers asked nervously. I smiled and took the whisk from her hand. "Sweetheart, I've been making a gravy since before you were born." Everyone laughed, and I felt a warmth I hadn't felt in so long, belonging. By the time we finished serving lunch, my back ached and my feet were sore, but I couldn't stop smiling. A little boy with chocolate on his cheeks looked up at me and said, "Thanks, lady. That pie was awesome." I crouched down to his level, my heart melting. "You're welcome, sweetheart. Maybe next time you can help me bake one." He grinned, showing off a missing front tooth, and ran back to his mother. After lunch, Nora came over and handed me a mug of coffee. "You fit right in," she said warmly. "It's like you've been part of this place forever." I felt my throat tighten. "Thank you," I whispered. "I didn't realize how much I needed this." She nodded knowingly. "Sometimes helping others fills the cracks in our own hearts." Those words stayed with me long after I went home that evening. Over the next few weeks, I became a regular at the center. Every morning I'd wake up before dawn, make myself a cup of tea, and drive down to the little white building by the church. It gave my day's purpose something to look forward to beyond the quiet of the lake house. Before long, people started calling me Miss Judy. My pies became a bit of a legend. It started with one apple pie, then pumpkin, then pecan. Soon enough, people were showing up just to see if I'd baked something new. The children loved helping me roll out dough, and the adults always found a reason to linger in the kitchen while the pies baked, drawn by the smell of cinnamon and comfort. Nora noticed how the place seemed brighter when I was there. One afternoon, she called me into her office, which was really just a converted storage room filled with paperwork and inspirational posters. "I've been thinking," she said. "We've got a group of young single moms who come here every week. They're trying to get back on their feet, and I think they'd love to learn from someone like you. Would you be open to teaching a little cooking class?" I blinked in surprise. "Me? Teach? Of course you," she said, smiling. "You have the patience and the heart for it. Plus, your pies are practically famous now." I laughed, feeling a blush creep into my cheeks. "Well, I do love to cook." "Then it's settled," Nora said, clapping her hands. "You start next Monday." That night, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, I thought about how far I'd come. Just a few weeks earlier, I'd been a woman running from heartbreak. Now, I was planning lessons and grocery lists, imagining the laughter of women learning to cook simple, nourishing meals for their families. When Monday came, I walked into that kitchen with butterflies fluttering in my stomach. But the moment I started talking, everything just flowed. I taught them how to stretch a meal, how to bake from scratch, how to add love to every dish. Between the chopping and stirring, we shared stories of loss, of strength, of finding our way again. One young woman named Kendra told me quietly, "You remind me of my mom. She passed last year, and I didn't think I'd ever feel that kind of warmth again. But being here, with you, it's helping." I felt tears sting my eyes, but I smiled. "Then we'll make sure this kitchen always feels like home, okay?" By the end of that first class, the whole room smelled like cinnamon and hope. I watched the women laugh and help each other, and I realized something. For years, I'd been desperate for my son's love, searching for purpose through his life. But I didn't need to be needed by him anymore. I was needed here by people who valued me for my kindness, not out of obligation. That night, as I drove home, I felt light freer than I'd been in years. I was building something beautiful, something that healed me from the inside out. But as peaceful as my days had become, life has a way of circling back to what's unfinished. What I didn't know was that Ryan's life was quietly unraveling at the same time. Ryan thought his life was perfect until it wasn't. While I was rebuilding my piece by the lake, his world was starting to crumble, one unnoticed piece at a time. I didn't know any of this then, but later, I would learn everything from Brittany's trembling voice, from neighbors' whispers, from the silence that followed when guilt finally caught up to him. Ryan had always been ambitious, even as a little boy. He wanted to be the best, to prove he could conquer the world, maybe because he saw me work so hard, maybe because losing his father so young made him afraid of being ordinary. He grew up determined to give his family the life I could only dream of. And for a while, he did. He had the nice house, the successful job, the perfect little family. But when I walked out of his life that Thanksgiving morning, something inside him cracked. At first, he didn't even notice I was gone. My note sat on the counter all day while he and Brittany cleaned up the kitchen. It wasn't until late afternoon, when his son asked, "When's Grandma coming back?" that he realized I hadn't just gone home early, I'd disappeared. Brittany told me later that he stood there staring at my empty chair, the untouched slice of pie still on the table. He read my note 3 times, then tossed it aside like it didn't matter. But that night, when he opened the fridge and saw the leftover turkey wrapped in the foil I'd carefully folded, he finally broke down. He called my phone, then again, and again, but I'd turned it off. Over the next few days, he convinced himself I was just being dramatic, that I'd come crawling back once I'd cooled off. He even told Brittany, "Mom needs to learn she can't guilt-trip me every time she feels lonely." But she wasn't so sure. "Ryan," she said gently, "what if this time you went too far?" He brushed it off, but her words stuck with him. A week passed. Then 2. The holidays came and went. And still, no word from me. He tried calling relatives, old friends, even my neighbor. No one knew where I was. For the first time in his adult life, Ryan began to understand what true silence felt like, the kind that sits heavy in your chest and follows you everywhere. Work wasn't any better. His boss, Mr. Whitmore, had always admired me. So when the holidays rolled around that year and Ryan showed up empty-handed, his boss jokingly asked, "Where's your mom's famous pie, son?" Ryan forced a smile. "She's busy this year." Mr. Whitmore's eyes softened. "Don't take her for granted, Ryan. You never know how long you'll have her." That small comment hit him harder than he expected. At home, things began to unravel too. Without me dropping by, the house seemed colder. Brittany felt the distance. Their son asked about me constantly, wondering why Grandma didn't call anymore. Ryan tried to explain, but how do you tell a child that you've broken someone's heart so deeply they might never come back? He started losing sleep, replaying that Thanksgiving conversation in his head like a movie he couldn't turn off. The words that had come out so casually, "You're becoming a burden now," sounded cruel, monstrous even. He told himself he didn't mean it, that it was just stress talking. But deep down, he knew the truth. He'd said it because he believed it, at least in that moment. And that realization made him hate himself. Brittany tried to comfort him, but she was hurting too. "You know, she loved you more than anyone else in the world," she told him one night. "You just couldn't see it." He rubbed his temples, his voice cracking. "I thought I was doing the right thing, teaching her to stand on her own, giving her space. I didn't think she'd actually leave." Brittany's eyes filled with tears. "Ryan, she didn't leave because she wanted space. She left because you broke her heart." He looked away, unable to face the truth. Then came the calls he couldn't ignore. My neighbors, worried after not seeing me for weeks, started leaving messages asking if he knew where I was. One of them mentioned that my mailbox was overflowing. Another said she'd seen my car gone one morning and never saw it return. He drove by my house one night, just to check. The lights were off, the curtains drawn. The place looked abandoned. When he stepped onto the porch, he found the faint outline of my footprints in the frost, the last trace of me he'd ever see there. He sat in his car for nearly an hour, staring at the dark windows, realizing just how empty his world had become. The next morning, he called Brittany from work. "I think I made a mistake," he said quietly. "You think?" she replied softly. "Ryan, she's your mother. You can't just replace that kind of love." He nodded silently, but his chest ached with regret. He wanted to fix things, but he didn't know how. Pride had always been his armor, now it was his prison. And as his guilt grew heavier, the rest of his life began to feel like it was closing in on him. Work pressure mounted, his health started to slip, and sleepless nights turned into exhausted days. He was haunted by the memory of my face that Thanksgiving night, the hurt, the disbelief, the quiet resignation in my eyes. He didn't know where I was, he didn't know if I'd ever forgive him. But one thing he did know, he couldn't go on living like that. Something had to change. Then something happened that forced him to confront the truth head-on. It was Brittany who found me first, and she was in tears. I remember that morning clearly. The air was sharp and cold, the kind of chill that made every breath feel like glass. I was in the kitchen of the community center, rolling out pie crust with a few of the young moms from my class. Christmas music played softly from a little radio on the counter, and for the first time in a long time, I was laughing without forcing it. Then my phone rang. The number wasn't saved in my contacts. I almost ignored it these days. Most of the calls I got were from volunteers or local donors. But something told me to answer. "Hello?" I said, wiping flour off my hands. There was a pause, then a shaky voice. "Judy? Oh, thank God, it's Brittany." I froze. My heart skipped. I hadn't heard her voice since that awful Thanksgiving night. "Brittany?" I said carefully. "What's wrong?" She was crying. I could hear it in the tremor of her words. "It's Ryan," she managed to say between sobs. "He's in the hospital." My knees almost gave out. I gripped the counter for balance. "What happened?" "He collapsed at work," she said. "They said it was exhaustion and dehydration. But it's more than that. He hasn't been eating. Barely sleeping. He's been carrying so much guilt, Judy. He's been trying to find you." For a few seconds I couldn't speak. The room around me blurred. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I didn't know if I should be angry, scared, or heartbroken. "Is he?" I swallowed hard. "Is he going to be okay?" "The doctors think so," she said. "But, Judy, the first thing he asked when he woke up was, 'Where's my mom?'" Those words shattered every wall I'd built to protect myself. I'd spent months convincing myself I was done with him, that I didn't need his love anymore. But in that moment, none of it mattered. He was still my son. The same boy I'd held when he was sick. The same boy I'd kissed goodnight 1,000 times. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. "Which hospital?" When she told me, I felt a strange mix of fear and determination wash over me. I hung up, my hands trembling, and turned to Nora, who had been quietly watching me. "You all right?" she asked softly. I nodded, though tears were already slipping down my cheeks. "My son's in the hospital," I whispered. "I think I need to go." She walked over and placed a gentle hand on my arm. "Then go," she said firmly. "Some things can't wait." "And Judy?" She paused, meeting my eyes. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Sometimes it just means choosing to heal for both of you." I nodded, barely able to speak. "Thank you." After class ended, I went home and packed a small bag. Not much, just a change of clothes, some toiletries, and one of my apple pies, still warm from the oven. I didn't know why I brought it, but it felt like something that connected me to the mother I used to be, the one who cared through food, through love. The drive to the city felt longer than it really was. Every mile brought back memories. Teaching Ryan to drive on this very road, taking him to school, the first time he told me he'd gotten the job that made him so proud. The tears came in waves. When I reached the hospital, the sterile smell hit me immediately, antiseptic and fear mixed together. I asked for his room number, my voice trembling. "Room 307. The nurse said kindly. "He's awake now, been asking if his mother was coming." I swallowed hard and nodded. My legs felt heavy as I made my way down the hallway. Each step echoed against the polished floor, a drumbeat of nerves and love and pain. Outside his door, I hesitated. I stared at the small window, at the sight of him lying there, pale, thinner than I remembered, wires and monitors surrounding him. My baby. My grown-up baby who'd hurt me so deeply. I wanted to run. I wanted to turn around and protect the fragile peace I'd built for myself. But I also wanted to hold him, to tell him everything was going to be okay, like I used to when he scraped his knee and cried into my shoulder. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. Ryan turned his head. The moment our eyes met, he burst into tears. His voice cracked as he whispered, "Mom." It took everything in me not to cry too. I walked to the side of his bed, setting the pie on the table beside him. "Hi, sweetheart," I said quietly. "You gave us all quite a scare." He laughed weakly through tears. "You came." "Of course I came. I said, my voice breaking. You're my son. He reached out a trembling hand, and for a long time, neither of us spoke. The sound of the heart monitor filled the silence between us, steady, rhythmic, fragile. After a while, he said, I'm sorry, Mom. For everything. I don't even know how to start making it right. I brushed a tear from his cheek. You start by getting better, I said softly. He nodded, his eyes closing as if even that simple forgiveness lifted a weight off his chest. As I sat beside his bed that night, watching him drift in and out of sleep, I realized how thin the line was between anger and love. You can be furious with someone and still love them so deeply that their pain feels like your own. I didn't know what would happen next, or whether I could ever truly forgive him. But I knew I couldn't walk away this time. Not when he needed me. Not when I still had love left to give. When Nora's words echoed in my mind, forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing to heal. I finally understood. So I packed a small bag, but this time, I was walking toward something, not away. When I stepped into that hospital room, he looked smaller somehow. The strong, confident man I'd raised, the one who once carried the world on his shoulders, was now pale and fragile, with dark circles under his eyes and a weariness that went beyond exhaustion. I stood in the doorway for a few seconds, just watching him breathe. His chest rose and fell slowly, and for a moment, he looked like that little boy who used to curl up next to me during thunderstorms, clutching my hand for comfort. When Ryan opened his eyes and saw me, tears welled instantly. Mom, he whispered, voice breaking, you really came. I forced a small smile, though my heart felt like it was tearing in two. Of course I came. Did you think I'd stay away forever? He tried to laugh, but it came out as a cough. After what I said to you, I wouldn't have blamed you. I sat down beside his bed, keeping my hands in my lap at first. There was so much to say, and yet no words seemed big enough to hold all the pain, regret, and love between us. Ryan, I began softly, I wasn't angry because you hurt my feelings. I was angry because you forgot who we were to each other. You made me feel like I didn't matter anymore. He shut his eyes tight, a single tear slipping down his cheek. I know, he said hoarsely. And I hate myself for it every day since you left. For a long while, the only sound in the room was the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. I finally reached for his hand, cold and trembling beneath mine. You've lost weight, I said gently, trying to lighten the moment. He gave a weak smile. I haven't had much of an appetite. Guilt doesn't taste very good. That made me laugh through tears. A sound halfway between heartbreak and relief. He went on, voice shaky. Mom, I've replayed that night 1,000 times. I don't even know why I said those things. I guess I was overwhelmed. Work, bills, the pressure of being a good husband and father, and you being there reminded me of everything I was failing at. I took it out on you. I studied him for a moment, trying to find anger inside myself, but there was none left. I'd let go of it somewhere between the smell of cinnamon pies and the sound of laughter at the charity center. You didn't fail at being my son, I said finally. You just forgot how to be human for a while. He looked up at me, eyes red. How do I make it up to you? I sighed softly. You can't. Not all at once. Forgiveness isn't something you earn like a paycheck. It's something you rebuild, piece by piece. Ryan nodded slowly, his expression full of quiet remorse. I'll do whatever it takes, Mom. I don't want to lose you again. We sat together for a long time. He told me about how he'd been volunteering at his son's school to try to feel useful again, how Brittany had been patient but worried, how he'd realized too late that the burden he'd complained about was the very foundation of his life. I thought I had it all, he admitted, staring at the ceiling. The house, the job, the family, but the truth is, none of it meant anything without you in it. That confession broke the last wall between us. I leaned forward and brushed his hair back, the way I used to when he was sick as a child. You'll be okay, Ryan, I whispered. You just have to start living like someone who knows what matters. He smiled faintly, tears still in his eyes. You always make everything sound simple. Because life is simple, I said softly. We just complicate it when we forget what love looks like. He nodded, taking a deep breath. Then he looked at the pie sitting on the table beside his bed. Is that your apple pie? I laughed. Of course. You didn't think I'd show up empty-handed, did you? He grinned, shaking his head weakly. You never change. Some things aren't meant to, I said with a smile. As we shared small pieces of pie, his first meal in days, something shifted between us. Not full forgiveness, not yet, but understanding, the kind that builds slowly, quietly, with time and care. When the nurse came in to check on him, she smiled at us. Family? She asked kindly. Ryan looked at me, then back at her. The best, he said, his voice steady for the first time. That night, as he drifted back to sleep, I sat in the chair beside his bed, holding his hand. The same hand I'd held when he learned to walk, the same one I'd held through heartbreak and loss. And now, I was holding it again, not because he needed saving, but because I needed to remember what unconditional love felt like. I stayed until dawn. When I finally stood to leave, Ryan stirred and opened his eyes. You'll come back tomorrow? He asked sleepily. I smiled and brushed his hair back again. We'll see, sweetheart, one step at a time. As I walked down the hallway, past the smell of disinfectant and the quiet hum of machines, my heart felt heavier and lighter all at once. He was still my son, and I still loved him. But love didn't mean forgetting. It meant choosing what kind of mother I wanted to be moving forward. What he did next proved just how much he had truly changed. A week later, I received a letter in the mail that left me speechless. It came in a plain white envelope with my name written in handwriting I hadn't seen in years. Neat, careful, but a little shaky. Ryan had always typed his messages or sent short texts, so seeing an actual handwritten letter from him felt almost surreal. My heart thudded in my chest as I sat on the porch, the lake glimmering behind me, and carefully opened it. The first line stopped me cold. Mom, I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want to earn it. I sat back in my chair, the wind rustling through the trees, and began to read. He wrote about everything, how he hadn't realized how much he depended on me until I was gone. How the house didn't feel like home anymore without my laughter, without my cooking, without the smell of pie that once filled the air. How he had seen the hurt in his wife's eyes when she realized what he'd done. He told me that he'd spent those weeks after the hospital trying to figure out how to make things right, and that words weren't enough. I need to show you, he'd written. You've always taught me that actions matter more than promises. The next part of the letter made my breath catch. I went to the Maplewood Community Center. I found out from Henry that you'd been volunteering there. So I asked Nora if I could help too. I didn't tell anyone who I was, I just said I wanted to give back. I could almost hear his voice as I read the next lines. The first day, I served soup. The second, I cleaned dishes. The third, I helped repair a broken oven. And every single day, I saw pieces of you there. The kindness in the way people treated each other, the laughter over burnt bread, the joy in small things. I realized those were the pieces I'd thrown away. Tears blurred the ink as I read on. Mom, I finally understand why you left. You weren't punishing me, you were finding yourself again. And now I want to find you too. Not to drag you back into my world, but to learn how to live with the kind of grace you carry. I covered my mouth, unable to breathe for a moment. My son, the same man who'd called me a burden, was humbling himself in a way I never imagined he could. He ended the letter with words that undid me completely. If you can, come see me. Not at the house, at the place that made you whole. I want to meet you there, not as a man trying to make things right, but as your son who's finally learning what love really means. I pressed the letter to my chest and wept. Not the kind of crying that comes from pain, but the kind that releases everything you've been holding in, the grief, the hope, the fragile belief that maybe, just maybe, people can change. Later that week, Nora called me at the center. Judy, she said with a smile in her voice. You'll never guess who showed up to volunteer. I already knew. Ryan, I whispered. Yes, she said softly. He's been here every morning, helping with deliveries and cleanup. He doesn't talk much, but you can tell he's trying to make a difference. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I felt pride, guilt, and overwhelming love all tangled up inside me. "Thank you for letting him stay," I said quietly. "Of course," Nora replied. "People can surprise you when they decide to change." That weekend, I went to the center. I didn't tell anyone I was coming, I just wanted to see for myself. When I walked through the doors, the smell of fresh bread filled the air, just like it had my first day there. Volunteers bustled about, chatting and laughing. Then I saw him. Ryan was standing at the sink, sleeves rolled up, scrubbing pots with a quiet determination that reminded me of his father. His hair was a little messy, his shirt damp from the splashing water, and yet there was something peaceful about him, something new. I didn't approach him right away. I just watched from a distance, my heart swelling with something I hadn't felt in years: pride. He wasn't doing this for recognition. He wasn't there to win points or look good. He was just doing the work. Humble. Simple. Real. Nora noticed me standing by the doorway. She smiled knowingly and whispered, "He doesn't know you're here yet. Want me to tell him?" I shook my head. "Not yet." So, I stood there until he turned, drying his hands with a towel, and spotted me. For a second, he froze. Then a slow, trembling smile spread across his face. "Mom," he said softly, almost like he was afraid I'd disappear. I stepped forward, feeling tears sting my eyes. "Hi, sweetheart." He looked around, as if searching for the right words. I didn't want to tell anyone who I was. I just wanted to do something good. For once. I nodded. "You already have." We didn't need to say much after that. The silence between us was enough. The kind of silence that speaks of forgiveness not complete yet, but beginning. That evening, I went home and sat on my porch as the sun set over the lake. I pulled out his letter again, tracing the words with my fingers. It wasn't just ink on paper, it was redemption. Proof that even broken relationships can heal if both hearts are willing to change. For the first time, I felt ready to go home, but not in the way he expected. I decided to visit Ryan, but I didn't tell him I was coming. Something inside me told me it had to be a surprise, not the kind that shocks, but the kind that softens hearts, the kind that lets a person see what love looks like without warning. I wanted to see him as he was now, not the man rehearsing apologies or trying to make things perfect for my arrival. I wanted to meet the son he was becoming. That morning was crisp and clear. Sunlight glinting off the lake as I drove into town. The roads I'd once traveled in tears now felt strangely peaceful. My hands didn't shake on the steering wheel this time. I wasn't returning out of guilt or pain, I was returning with purpose. When I pulled into the Maplewood Community Center parking lot, it was busier than I'd ever seen it. Cars lined the street, children ran around with hot cocoa, and volunteers carried boxes of food inside. The big holiday meal drive banner hung across the entrance, flapping in the breeze. I parked off to the side and sat for a moment, taking a deep breath. My heart was thudding in that familiar mix of nerves and love that only a mother can feel. Then I grabbed my coat, tucked my hair behind my ears, and stepped inside. The smell hit me first: fresh bread, roasted vegetables, the faint sweetness of pie. The air buzzed with laughter and chatter. It felt alive, warm, exactly like home should. And there he was. Ryan stood near the serving line, wearing a plain gray apron over his shirt. His sleeves were rolled up, his hands moving quickly as he filled bowls with soup and passed them to a line of guests. His hair was a little longer now, a little messier, and there was a calmness in his face I hadn't seen in years. He looked older, wiser, humbled in the best way. I didn't speak right away. I just got in line like everyone else, my heart pounding as I watched him smile and talk to people. He had changed. Not just in words or intentions, in the way he carried himself, in how he looked people in the eye with kindness. When it was my turn, he ladled soup into a bowl without looking up. "Hi there," he said with his easy volunteer tone. "Would you like some bread with that?" I smiled softly. "I heard the food. Here's good." He froze. His head snapped up, and for a moment, disbelief crossed his face. Then, his eyes filled with tears. "Mom?" I couldn't help but laugh. Well, are you going to serve your mother or just stare at her? He came around the counter so fast he nearly dropped the ladle. The other volunteers chuckled as he rushed toward me, apron still on, and wrapped me in a hug that was tighter than any words could ever be. Mom, he whispered against my shoulder, his voice breaking. You came. I smiled through tears. Of course I did. You invited me in your letter, remember? He pulled back just enough to look at me. I didn't know if you'd want to. Sweetheart, I said softly, cupping his cheek. I'll always want to when it's worth coming back for. Around us, the noise of the kitchen carried on laughter, plates clattering, the hum of people working together. But in that moment, it felt like the world had paused. It was just me and my son, standing there in the middle of everything we'd lost and found again. He wiped his eyes and grinned. I was trying to do this without making a big deal out of it. But seeing you here, I can't believe this is real. I laughed. Well, believe it. Now go wash your hands before you touch me. Again, you've been handling soup all morning, he chuckled, and the volunteers nearby joined in. The tension that had once defined our relationship melted into laughter and ease. It felt natural, simple, like it used to when he was a boy. After his shift ended, we sat together on one of the benches outside the center. The winter air bit at our cheeks, but the warmth between us was enough to keep the chill away. I've been coming here every day, Ryan said quietly, staring at the sky. It's helped me more than I can explain. Serving others? It made me realize how blind I was before. I thought success was money and comfort. But real success is knowing you made someone's day a little easier. I smiled, my heart swelling. That's something your father would have said. He looked at me, a small smile tugging at his lips. Brittany says that too. She thinks you'd be proud of me. I am proud, I said, my voice trembling slightly. Not because you're volunteering, but because you're learning to live with an open heart again. He nodded, his eyes glistening. I want to make things right, Mom. I don't expect you to move back or forget everything I said. I just want a second chance. I took his hand in mine and squeezed it gently. You already have it, Ryan. He blinked, trying to hold back tears, then chuckled softly. You really are the strongest person I know. I smiled. No, sweetheart. I just had to learn the hard way that strength isn't about holding on, it's about knowing when to let go. The sun dipped lower, painting the horizon in gold and pink. Ryan took a deep breath, exhaling a shaky laugh. You know, he said, I never thought I'd see the day my mom would stand in a soup kitchen line just to surprise me. I laughed, nudging his shoulder. Life's full of surprises, Ryan. You just have to be open to them. He turned to me, his eyes soft and filled with something pure, gratitude. Thank you, he whispered, for coming back, for still believing in me. I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his face. I didn't come back to make you feel better. I came back to see if you were truly ready to change. And now I see you are. He nodded, and for the first time in a long while, I saw peace in his eyes. But I still had one more lesson for him to learn. I told Ryan I wasn't coming back to live with him. We were sitting in his car, parked by the edge of the lake after leaving the community center. The water shimmered under the winter sunlight, rippling softly against the shore. He'd insisted on driving me home, and for the first few miles, we didn't say much. The silence wasn't awkward anymore, it was calm, familiar. But as we pulled up near my cottage, I knew it was time to say what needed to be said. He looked out at the water, his hands resting on the steering wheel. You know, Mom, there's plenty of room at the house. We could fix up the guest room. You could come live with us again. His voice was hopeful, almost pleading. It would mean a lot to have you there. I smiled gently, touched by the offer, but I already knew my answer. Ryan, I said softly, I love you for wanting that. But I can't move back in. He turned to me, surprised. Why not? We're good now, better than before. We can start over. I reached for his hand, holding it between mine. We have started over, sweetheart. But that doesn't mean we go backward. I spent too many years thinking that being your mother meant being right next to you, cooking for you, worrying about you, trying to fix your problems. But I've learned that love doesn't always mean staying. Sometimes it means giving space for both of us to grow. He stared at me for a moment, his brow furrowing. So, you don't want to live with me again? It's not about what I want, I said, smiling faintly. It's about what's best for both of us. You have your own family now. Brittany and the kids need you to be their center, not me. And I've finally found my own place in the world. Here. I gestured toward the cottage and the peaceful lake beyond. This is where I belong. Ryan looked out the window, blinking hard. I just thought maybe I could take care of you for a change. I squeezed his hand. You can still do that, just not by keeping me under your roof. Take care of me by living a life I can be proud of. Be the kind of man who makes the world better, who treats people with kindness. That's all I ever wanted for you. He was quiet for a while, processing my words. Then he let out a soft laugh. You're still teaching me lessons, huh? I smiled. That's what mothers do, whether you're 5 or 35. He chuckled, shaking his head. You know, when I was younger, I used to think your strength came from how much you could handle the work, the loneliness, everything. But now I realize it comes from how much you let go. I felt a lump in my throat. Maybe, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But I learned that from losing things I thought I couldn't live without. Your father, you, my old life. Turns out, sometimes letting go is the only way to find yourself again. We sat there in silence for a long time, watching the sun dip lower, turning the lake into a sheet of gold. The quiet wasn't heavy, it was peaceful, full of understanding. Finally, Ryan said, Can I at least come visit? Maybe help out at the center with you? Of course, I said, smiling warmly. You're always welcome. Just remember this time. You're coming to my world, not pulling me back into yours. He nodded slowly, a small smile playing on his lips. Deal. Before he left, I asked him to come inside for tea. We sat at my small kitchen table, the same one Carl and I had shared so many mornings, sipping tea and eating leftover pie. The air was filled with that comforting silence only love can create. Mom, Ryan said suddenly, do you ever think Dad would be proud of me? I looked at him for a long moment. He always was, I said finally, even when you lost your way. Because pride doesn't come from perfection, Ryan. It comes from the courage to change. He swallowed hard, blinking away tears. I wish I'd realized that sooner. I reached across the table and touched his hand. You realized it when it mattered most. That's enough. He nodded, a quiet smile forming. You know, I used to think Thanksgiving would never mean the same again after what happened. But maybe now, it'll mean something deeper. I smiled. It should. Because now you understand what gratitude really is, not for the food, but for the people who never stop loving you, even when you don't deserve it. He looked down at his cup, then back at me. I don't deserve you, Mom. You're wrong, I said softly. You deserve every bit of love that comes your way. You just had to learn how to receive it. When he left that evening, he hugged me long and tight. I'll be back soon, he said. And this time, not just for the holidays. I watched him drive away, the sound of his car fading into the distance. For a moment I stood there, the chill of evening settling around me, and smiled. My heart was full not because everything was perfect, but because it was real. I looked up at the first stars beginning to appear in the sky and whispered, Thank you, Carl. We did it. Little did we know, our story would soon inspire others in ways we couldn't imagine. A local journalist came to the charity center to write a feature about holiday kindness. It had been a few months since Ryan and I found our rhythm again. We weren't trying to erase the past anymore, just build something new from the ashes of what had broken. Every week, we volunteered, together at the Maplewood Community Center. He helped with deliveries and repairs, while I continued teaching my little cooking classes. The laughter, the shared meals, the sound of children playing in the background, it all felt like life was blooming again. One chilly afternoon, Nora called me into her office. Judy, she said with that warm smile of hers. There's a journalist coming from the Maplewood Gazette. They're doing a story on the center, how we bring families together during the holidays. I think you'd be perfect to talk to. I laughed nervously. Oh, I'm no one special, I just bake pies. Exactly, Nora said. That's why people will listen. You have a way of turning simple things into something meaningful. I agreed, though I had no idea what was about to happen. The next morning, the journalist, a young woman named Hannah, arrived with a notebook and a curious smile. She asked everyone questions: how they found the center, what it meant to them, what the holidays represented now. When she got to me, I was kneading dough on the counter, flour dusting my apron like snow. "So Judy," she began, "why do you volunteer here?" I smiled softly. "Because once upon a time I forgot who I was. This place reminded me." Her pen paused mid-scribble. "What do you mean by that?" I hesitated, not wanting to share too much, but something about her kindness made it easy. I told her about losing my husband, about drifting away from my son, and how this little kitchen full of strangers had given me back a sense of purpose. I didn't go into details about Thanksgiving or the pain of walking away, just enough to show her that love could survive even after it breaks. When we finished, she thanked me and moved on to interview Ryan, who was fixing a shelf near the pantry. I didn't think much of it until later, when she pulled me aside. "You know," she said, "your son just gave the same answer you did." Blinked. "He did?" She nodded, smiling. "He said he volunteers because he lost sight of who he was, and this place helped him remember." My throat tightened. "He said that?" She smiled. "It's funny you two told the same story from two different sides. I think people need to hear it." A week later, the article was published online with the title "The Burden That Became a Blessing." I nearly dropped my cup of tea when I saw it. There were photos of the community center, of me holding a tray of pies, and of Ryan handing a bowl of soup to a little boy. But what struck me most was the story itself. Hannah had written it beautifully about family, forgiveness, and how a simple act of kindness could heal old wounds. She never mentioned our names directly, just a mother and her son who found their way back to each other through giving. But somehow, people knew. The community center's phone rang nonstop. Strangers showed up wanting to volunteer, donate, or just talk. Churches and schools began sharing the story as an example of gratitude and second chances. I started getting letters, dozens of them, from people all over the state. Some were from mothers who'd grown distant from their children. Others were from sons and daughters who'd hurt the people who raised them and didn't know how to make it right. One letter, written in shaky handwriting, said, "Your story gave me the courage to call my mom after 10 years. She cried when I told her I was sorry. Thank you for reminding me that it's never too late." Reading those words made my heart swell in a way I can't describe. For so long, I'd felt invisible, like my pain and my love existed in a quiet corner of the world no one could see. Now, somehow, my story had become a bridge for others. Ryan called me the night the article reached the national news. "Mom, can you believe this?" he said, half laughing, half crying. "People are actually writing to me, thanking me for being honest. Me, the guy who messed everything up." I laughed softly. "That's the thing about truth, sweetheart. When you're brave enough to face it, it helps other people face theirs." He was quiet for a moment before saying, "You know, I think Dad would be proud of us. Not because of the story, but because we didn't give up." I smiled, tears welling up. "I think he's been proud all along." The next Sunday, Nora invited us both to speak at a local church about the power of forgiveness. I was nervous, but Ryan stood beside me, holding my hand as I shared our journey, not the pain, but the healing. The audience was silent, many wiping their eyes. Afterward, people came up to us, hugging, thanking, promising to call their families. I realized then that what we'd gone through wasn't just for us, it was for everyone who needed to be reminded that love can survive even the harshest winters. That Christmas, the community center hosted its biggest meal yet. We fed more than 300 people, all of them smiling, laughing, living proof that kindness multiplies when shared. When the night ended, Ryan turned to me, eyes shining with tears. "You did this," he said quietly. "You changed lives." I shook my head. "We did this, Ryan. Together." We hugged, surrounded by the hum of laughter and the smell of food and home. But the next Thanksgiving brought a surprise that left me speechless once again. That morning, Ryan knocked on my door with a covered dish in his hands. It was the day before Thanksgiving, 1 year since the night that had shattered my heart and eventually rebuilt it. The air outside was crisp, the sky soft and gray, and the scent of pine drifted from the woods nearby. I was setting the table for a small dinner with a few neighbors when the knock came. When I opened the door, there he was, my son, standing on the porch, bundled in a brown coat, his cheeks pink from the cold. His eyes, however, were bright and calm. He smiled nervously. "I made your stuffing recipe," he said, holding up the dish. "The right way this time." For a second, I couldn't speak. I just stared at him, the weight of everything we'd been through flashing behind my eyes. Then I laughed softly and stepped aside. "Well, bring it in before it gets cold." As he walked in, I noticed how different he looked, not just older, but lighter. The stress that used to hang around him like a storm cloud had faded. He moved through my little cottage as if he belonged there, yet still with the quiet respect of someone who knew he'd once been unwelcome. He set the dish on the counter, glanced around, and smiled. "You've made this place beautiful, Mom." I smiled, feeling a swell of pride. "Thank you. It's not much, but it's mine." "It's perfect," he said. "Just like you always wanted." I poured us each a cup of tea, and we sat at the small kitchen table, the same one where I'd told him months ago that I wasn't coming back to live with him. It felt different now, warmer, full of peace instead of pain. "So," I said, "did Brittany help with the stuffing? Or did you brave the kitchen alone?" He chuckled. "She supervised. But I did most of it. I even used the handwritten recipe you gave me years ago, the one you said never to lose." My heart softened. "You kept that?" "Of course," he said, looking at me. "I may have been blind for a while, but I never forgot who taught me everything that matters." We talked for hours that day, not about apologies or regrets, but about life, about my classes at the charity center, his work at the new outreach program he'd helped start, the kids' school projects. There was laughter. Real laughter. Filling the small kitchen until my sides hurt. At one point, he reached across the table and took my hand. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to dread Thanksgiving. After that night, I thought I'd ruined it forever. But now..." He looked around the cozy little room, the smell of cinnamon and roasted herbs in the air. "Now it feels like Thanksgiving again." I smiled, squeezing his hand. "That's because it's not about the feast, Ryan. It's about who we share it with and what we've learned along the way." He nodded, his eyes glistening. "I learned more this year than in my entire life." Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, he insisted on helping me prepare dinner. We cooked side by side, chopping, stirring, laughing. It reminded me of when he was little, standing on a chair beside me, trying to mash potatoes with a wooden spoon. Every moment felt like a gift. When the meal was ready, we sat down together at the small table, plates full, candles flickering. The silence that settled wasn't awkward, it was sacred. Ryan bowed his head and said, "Can I say grace?" I nodded, my throat tightening. He began softly, "Thank you, Lord. For second chances. For family, for forgiveness, for the strength of a mother's heart. And thank you for teaching me that love isn't about what we deserve, it's about what we give." Tears welled in my eyes before he even finished. I reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "Amen," I whispered. We ate slowly, savoring every bite, every word, every quiet smile. The food tasted better than it had in years, maybe because it was seasoned with peace instead of resentment. After dinner, we sat by the fireplace, a gentle fire crackling. Ryan leaned back in his chair and said softly, "You know, I used to think you were the one who needed saving. But it turns out, you were the one who saved me." I chuckled through tears. "Oh, sweetheart, you saved yourself. You just needed a little reminder of who you were." He smiled, eyes shining in the firelight. "You were never my burden, Mom. You were my blessing all along." Those words, the ones I'd longed to hear, but never expected to melted every last shard of the pain I'd carried. I leaned over and kissed his forehead. "And you, my dear boy, are my greatest gift." For the rest of the evening, we talked and reminisced. He told me about how his son, my grandson, had been asking when Grandma would host Thanksgiving again. I promised him next year they'd all come to the lake, and I'd make extra pie just for him. As Ryan stood to leave, he hugged me tightly. "I love you, Mom," he whispered. "I love you too, Ryan," I said, my voice trembling with joy. After he drove away, I stood at the window, watching the taillights fade down the road. The night was quiet, except for the gentle rustle of the trees. I pressed my hand against my heart and whispered a prayer of gratitude, not for things regained, but for hearts renewed. The pain that had once haunted every Thanksgiving was gone. In its place was something purer, deeper, a peace I hadn't known I could feel again. And for the first time in years, my heart felt completely whole. Looking back, I realize I had to lose everything to find myself. It's strange how time softens even the sharpest memories. The pain that once felt unbearable is now just a quiet ache, a reminder of how far I've come. When I think about that Thanksgiving night, the one where Ryan called me a burden, I don't feel anger anymore. I feel gratitude. Because that moment, as cruel as it was, forced me to rebuild my life from the ground up. Now, each morning I wake up to the sound of the lake brushing against the shore outside my window. The cottage that once felt too empty has become a sanctuary. The walls are filled with laughter again, not the kind that fills a whole house, but the gentle, genuine kind that seeps into the soul. My kitchen smells of cinnamon and coffee, and every pie I bake carries a piece of the woman I fought to become. Thanksgiving isn't about the feast anymore. It's not about perfect meals or fancy decorations or pretending everything's fine. It's about truth. About sitting with the people who matter, even if there are fewer of them now, and knowing that love can survive even the deepest wounds. Ryan visits often these days. Not out of guilt, not out of obligation, but because he truly wants to. He brings Brittany and the kids, their laughter spilling through the door before they even step inside. My grandson runs straight to me every time, yelling, "Grandma Judy!" before throwing his little arms around my waist. They help me in the kitchen, Ryan, chopping vegetables, Brittany setting the table, and the kids sneaking bits of pie crust when they think I'm not looking. Every visit feels like its own small miracle. Sometimes, when the house is full again, I look at my son across the table and see the man Carl and I always hoped he'd become: strong, kind, humble. I see the lessons he learned not from my words, but from my absence. And I thank God every single time for giving us both another chance. I still volunteer at the community center with Nora. We've grown close, like sisters almost. Together, we've expanded the cooking program. Now we teach not just young mothers, but teenagers and even retirees who want to find connection again. Ryan helps organize donation drives and holiday meals. Brittany leads a small group that helps families struggling after loss. We've turned our pain into purpose, our story into hope. Sometimes, people come up to me after reading the article that started it all. They tell me how it made them call their parents or forgive an old friend. Every time I smile and tell them the same thing: forgiveness doesn't fix the past, it frees your future. On quiet evenings, I sit on my porch, wrapped in Carl's old blanket, watching the sunset over the water. The lake reflects the sky in shades of gold and rose, and I can almost feel his presence beside me. I tell him about our son, how he finally understands what it means to love without pride. I tell him about our grandson, how he's growing fast and already has Carl's same mischievous grin. "See, my love," I whisper sometimes. It all came full circle. Every Thanksgiving now, Ryan and his family spend the day here at the cottage. We don't have fancy dinners anymore, just simple food, cooked together, shared around a small table by the fire. There's no tension, no silence filled with resentment. Only laughter, warmth, and gratitude. Last year, as we sat down to eat, my grandson looked at me with his big brown eyes and said, "Grandma, Daddy told me you're a hero." I laughed, shaking my head. "A hero? Oh no, sweetheart, I'm just your grandma." He grinned. "He said you're his hero too." The words caught in my throat. Ryan smiled across the table, eyes full of love. "He's right," he said softly. That moment, that small, beautiful moment, felt like the true definition of Thanksgiving. Not just giving thanks for what you have, but for the strength to forgive, to change, to start again. Sometimes people ask me if I ever wish things had gone differently. If I wish Ryan had never said those words. Or if I wish I hadn't left. And my answer is always the same. No. Because without that pain, neither of us would have grown. Without that night, we wouldn't have learned the meaning of grace. The truth is, walking away wasn't about revenge or pride. It was about remembering my worth and teaching my son to see his own humanity again. It was about turning heartbreak into healing. Now, when I bake pies for the center, I think about all the people who will eat them, the lonely, the lost, the hopeful, and I whisper a little prayer with each one. A prayer that they too will find the peace I found when I stopped begging for love and started living in it. I've learned that life doesn't always give you what you want, but it always gives you what you need, even if it comes wrapped in pain. So this year, as the fire crackles and laughter fills my little cottage, I'll look around at the faces of those I love and know, deep in my bones, that every broken moment was worth it. Because Thanksgiving isn't just a holiday to me anymore, it's a reminder that no matter how far you fall, love can still find its way home. Because sometimes, walking away is the only way to be truly found.